There you go.
Okay. Good evening. It's 6:16 on Thursday the 28th. This is the Norwalk, East Norwalk TOD Oversight Committee meeting. We have an hour and a half window in which we can get our meeting in before we get kicked out by another group that needs the Zoom platform. So we're going to work as quickly as possible. We're hoping this is the last meeting before the draft is finalized and sent out to the public, and we had 3 agenda items to go over. One was the draft design guidelines, which is an appendix to the report, the draft zoning regulations, which also is another appendix, and then commentary on the draft report tonight. Oh, hi, Stephanie. So I think we'll start with the design guidelines, and I'm hoping this is a 20-minute max conversation. What was included, and then hopefully Emily can help run through this, is there were some certain specifications that DPW was looking for treatments in relation to sidewalk lighting and so forth, because we want to get those incorporated into the standards. So that way, when we're looking at, hey Judith, when we're looking at road projects, we can ask DOT to include those in their process. So I don't know if Vanessa and or Emily, if you want to run through the specifics, and then we can get any comments before we move on to the next item.
Maybe if Vanessa, if you're willing to give sort of an overview of why the DPW is looking for these particular standards, and then I can talk about what we actually put in place.
Sure. So the thought behind it is that we would like to make the village district with the same aesthetics throughout. And one way that we can accomplish that is to incorporate that in our design guidelines. And then whoever will do any work in the city right of way in that area will have to follow that. We already have something very similar in place in the South Norwalk area, where we have the brick pavers on the sidewalk and some of the colors that they need to follow for the brick pavers and also the crosswalks. So we would like to have something similar, meaning as a standard to that area. What we would like to do, that was what we hear from the public, is that we want something specific to the area that will give him a special East Norwalk feeling. So I think that Emily will be able to show the group some options, and then we can probably vote on what will be your preference. And then we're gonna adopt that as part of the design guideline. After that is adopted, the DPW will design that and make part of our regular standard, our city standards, and then it will be part of what will need to be installed in the right of way.
So I don't know if you want me to share my screen, Steve, or if you want me to just describe where this is in the document. If you have the...
Here, I'll give it a shot. I think
Okay.
I got it. If I can find it.
Well, I can do it this way and see if that works. Can you see a bunch of standards?
You're quicker than me. You go ahead.
Okay, fair enough. All right, so these are at the end of your design guidelines. I'm showing them to you in the PDF because there's some attachments to them. Plus, we don't see all the cross outs that I did to show you what changed and what didn't. Basically, I had removed some of the lighting standards and all of that were in the original design guidelines out so that we could cluster the specific standards here at the end. So what we're looking at is, after the discussion with Vanessa and Steve, is lighting, curbs, bus shelters, crosswalk pattern, and sidewalk pattern, and then on-street parking. And so Vanessa shared the current DPW standards with me, and I went through them, and the goal was to look and see what are people required to do now, and then how do we tweak those to give that special identity to East Norwalk, so that there's a consistent understanding of quality of materials and type of materials throughout the entire city, but that they are altered for East Norwalk. So as you move into East Norwalk, you get a different feel of this is a unique place within the city itself. So in terms of lighting, and I'll scroll down to what that is in a moment, the key piece there was that the lighting pole remained the same throughout the city. So, and what that does is it's ease of maintenance, right? Is if something needs to be repaired or replaced, we're going to the same places for all the pieces. So given that the pole is the same, what do you do about the piece on the top? And so we are recommending, I'll just scroll down briefly to it. So this is the Yorktown Lumiere. It's Spring City, which is one of the two vendors that the city uses. It attaches to the poles that the city is already using, but it's got a slightly different feel from the Lumieres in the other parts of Norwalk. This has got a bit of a traditional feel to it, but kind of a clean line to that traditional feel. So we looked at a couple of options, and that seemed to be the most appropriate for this area. And remembering that we want to keep that maritime feel to the area and also speak to some of the historic elements of the East Norwalk area. In terms of curbs, that was easy. Granite curbs throughout. That should be a standard everywhere in the city, and there's no need to change it. Bus shelters I'm going to come back to because they're at the end of the PDF, but this is where we'd like some thoughts from you guys on this, because we have two options and I would really appreciate your thinking. In terms of the crosswalk patterns, so there is the use of brick pavers throughout the city, and you see different color combinations of these brick pavers. And I believe in the rest of the city where these have been put into place, they're a little bit more of sort of a brick look. Here we thought that the herringbone and the 90-degree, and let me just zoom into this a little bit so you guys can see it more close up. Sorry, it gets a little fuzzy. So you see the transition period. So if you are have trouble visually or mobility, you feel that transition from the sidewalk into the crosswalk. And then this 90-degree herringbone, same color as the rest of the city, lighter color than the surrounding asphalt, but that 90-degree herringbone is not used elsewhere in the city. It's a nice traditional pattern, and it made a lot of sense for East Norwalk. Similarly, the sidewalk pattern that you're looking at, so here you see the granite curb, this use of a combination of brick colored bricks as opposed to the gray bricks. Again, this use of the brick colored to line things like the tree grates or opening for trees is used elsewhere in Norwalk, but not this particular pattern of the 3 soldier bricks stacked on top of each other. It's a different pattern. We also really liked, as we discussed it, using the dark gray to indicate an entrance to the building. So again, these are the same concrete bricks. We're looking at similar materials throughout the city, but just used in a different way to create that identity for East Norwalk.
Excuse me.
And then, so you see the, yeah.
Emily, John Pinto. Let me. Are the areas that are around the base of the tree, all that is it impervious, or is that going to be? Is it impervious areas or what?
They're all pervious areas, and in this case, the city, and Vanessa, you may be able to talk a little bit more about this than I will. The city is moving away from the tree grates to a different material that allows the trees to breathe more easily and be less restricted than they might be from the tree grate. We had looked at some tree grate options, but Vanessa, I don't know if you want to comment on the other material that's being specified.
Sure. So, hi, John. How are you? So we used to have all those grades in the past, but we were having a lot of trouble, not only with maintenance, but with some tripping hazards, particularly with women walking on hills over them. So about a year and a half, I would say maybe 2 years, we start switching them. So that's why we would like to propose the same thing. We already have them in South Norwalk, we already installed them, and all the new ones that we put in. So we can use different colors for that as well. We can pick the color, but this is kind of new what a lot of the municipalities have been using, and we would like to follow that trend.
Well, no, all I was actually referring to is basically what the Harbor Commission is actually Harbor Commission is interested in is minimizing sort of runoff from impervious surfaces.
Right.
And so if it's porous enough where it can capture water, certainly that would minimize the runoff from a concrete surface down into basically run to the harbor.
That's correct. It is pervious. So all the time that it rains, it will moist the soil underneath.
Right.
You know, it's not like a concrete base.
Yeah, okay.
You're not going to have the runoff from it.
Well, we'll minimize runoff. Let me put that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No, thank you.
So then let me pull out of that. And then the other thing that we looked at, and this has been used, this type of treatment has been used in one other place in Norwalk. I really liked this idea and wanted to bring it to you guys for your comments. So what we're looking at here, if you can see my mouse, is this paving that's indicating where parking is actually permeable paving. So it allows the water to seep through rather than running off. And I like this for two reasons. One is where it's appropriate. I'm a big fan of permeable paving for exactly the exact reasons that John was mentioning earlier. And the second is I like the color division between the travel way and where the parking is. So that just gives your eye a better sense of who should be where. You know, this is where the moving cars are, this is where the parked cars are. Now you've got, you know, here's the indication of the division between the roadway and the pedestrian travel way. This is actually a nice example from California of how you can separate sidewalk from parking from street just in general. I think the parking, the sidewalk widths in East Norwalk aren't always of such a way that, you know, this tree treatment would work, but certainly that permeable paving is a really interesting idea, and I would be very interested in your thoughts on that. And then the final piece that we wanted to show you, and then we can jump back to any of these, is the idea of the bus shelters. So we went to Brasco International to look at what they had as options. And I've presented a couple of options here. Brasco is working in Connecticut. So the other option that we looked at was out in California. And we were just a little concerned that they were too far away to be able to cost effectively serve East Norwalk. So there's two different types we're looking at here. One is the eclipse and the sloped or the arch version, and the other is this tech line version. And there's a couple of different things to look at here. So one is the roof line, how much is getting covered there. You have certainly multiple options in terms of colors and seating and so forth and so on. This sloped as opposed to the arched was quite interesting. And then what I liked, and this shows a little bit of it, unfortunately, all you could do is pull down the product sheets. If you go to their website, you can see all the different options, but all of these can be fitted with solar panels on the top that then allow for lighting. And if you want to get super fancy, air conditioning of the units themselves, the shelters themselves. And so given where this was going to be placed, the idea of solar panels that then could light this at night was really important. I think the other piece, and you see it a little bit better in the tech line, and was, but is also available to us in the Eclipse, was the ability to actually use those glass panels and put an image on them. And so one of the things that, you know, we thought about is could you screen in an image that references the history of East Norwalk? Could you pull in some of the maritime? Could you pull in some of the original historic buildings and development patterns and basically screen them onto that glass back or sides? And so the other thing you can do, if you prefer not to have the glass, is you can see that there's a mesh option here. You have the ability to do some wayfinding on those there. You can have something that's very simple, like that little touch of color there. In terms of color, I think black is probably the most traditional, but you do have the option of going to a very bright color, such as the blue, or the more muted for the green. But again, thinking about the maritime heritage, thinking about the historic aspects, I think the black would work well with the black lighting. And then there's just the question becomes, what's the roof line that you want? And would you be interested in having some sort of image screened onto it to really call out the identity? So those are the standards that we're looking at, and that Vanessa would like some input, and I would certainly like some input on, and happy to open it up for some discussion.
I like the idea of the solar panels, Emily. I like the arch, a little bit more openness. I'm not quite sure DPW will understand what glass does around in the Norwalk and South Norwalk. I don't know. In my day as a youngster, it didn't do too well.
Okay. Great, that's very helpful.
I am curious, Emily, or maybe Vanessa, you may know, what would happen in the case during the winter, like if we had snow with the solar on the top?
So in terms of solar panels, they're usually slanted so that the snow will slide off. You will get a reduced amount of energy coming through them in the winter, partly because the fewer sun hours per day, and partly because you will get some snow cover, but generally the snow slides right off. They're pitched to do that.
Emily, what's the maintenance on solar panels and the longevity?
Longevity is high. The maintenance is usually very limited. You know, I think the appropriate thing to do would probably to call the company and just double check what the life of their solar panels are. They can be integrated, or actually if you already have bus shelters, they sell them. I believe they sell them as a kit to bring in, but once installed, solar panel maintenance tends to be minimal.
They wouldn't be self-sufficient as far as lighting is concerned, so that you still need an electrical hookup somewhere?
I think you'd probably want an electrical hookup again, probably more for the winter months, just to supplement it.
Mm.
So shouldn't be too difficult to install if the DPW is already doing work in that area anyway. But I don't think that or they could be self-sufficient, but you may not have light all the time when you want it.
It's Diane Cece. I'd like to ask kind of a couple of high-level questions, because I'm hesitant to really sink our teeth into design standards while we're still grappling with the zoning regulations as well. But I recognize that this is a potential tool regardless. So my first question is, the design standards that we're defining now as the East Norwalk Village Design standards or guidelines, these would be the guidelines that would be used regardless of anything related to the TOD project or to new zoning regulations.
That's
So
right.
Vanessa, for example, in conjunction with the East Norwalk road widening project, correct?
That's correct, Diane. So this would be implemented on the village district areas. So it will be pretty much East Avenue and some of the streets off East Avenue up to a certain distance. So if we have that already as part of the village, we're gonna just use the same design and send to the East Avenue team that is working on the roadway, and those will get incorporated as the streetscape for that. And now let's say if there is a new development that will come to that area and do something on one of the side streets that will be in the map, that's what they will have to follow. Just I want to clarify that the bus shelter, it is there because there is one bus shelter on East Avenue that is right under the bridge, and that one will have to be replaced. So we are thinking that if we already, and would be maybe a good idea to have a green one where people can charge their cell phones. So I think that if we incorporate that also as part of the guidelines, we can ask that to be used.
And the idea with these improvements in terms of being the standards when we talk about the village district, we're not necessarily talking about all of the side streets coming down from the highway right to Mill Pond, though, correct?
Correct.
Or how far into the side streets?
It will be only where is defined the village district.
And for clarification from Steve, I think we went through this the other night, that it's from the highway to Wells Fargo.
Yeah, and it goes into a little bit on each side street.
Okay, but not all the side streets.
It
but
it wraps the corner. I don't have the, unfortunately, I don't have the map on my screen to show.
Let me see
Okay.
if I can pull it
And I
up.
think what we have to do then is we have to ensure that there's a connection, regardless of TOD again, or zoning regulations, that there's a connection between any of this design work and the East Avenue project, so that the residents don't end up with a disconnect from the highway to Myrtle Street, and then everything new and the standards begin at Myrtle and go south. Because we literally would have a complete broken implementation of how that road gets done in the widening and lowering project.
But hold on, I just need to add one thing. The widening of East Avenue, the limits of that, it is from Fitch all the way down to Winfield. So under that project, that area would be using these standards. Beyond that, it's only when we have someone that will be developing those sidewalks or any work in that area.
Okay, so that's where we would have an issue with this, because originally it went all the way up to the highway, and then it got cut back to St. John, and then it got cut back to Myrtle. If you're suggesting Fitch now, we're going to have a complete disconnect from half, literally, or more than half of East Avenue.
I'm sorry,
East
I mean
Avenue and the
Myrtle, I mean
railroad
Myrtle,
bridge.
Diane.
So we
Well,
need to be able to fund either through the East Avenue project. It should have been back on the table to begin with, but we need to be able to have a complete solution from the highway down to the railroad bridge.
I'm sorry, I just want to correct. I said it's Myrtle. The widening of East Avenue is from Myrtle until
Right.
Winfield. So
The
that is
physical
for sure
widening,
will get
right.
done, yes.
Right.
We have underground utilities that will continue up to Olmsted, okay? But we are not doing any sidewalk related work or widening of the road on that stretch.
Right, and I understand that, but I'm suggesting that we have to make some improvements coming from Fitch all the way up to the highway. So
I think that after we have this big stretch in place, it will be much easier to fund the gap that will be missing between 995.
okay, and again, just so that it's on the record, it needs to be included regardless of the TOD and the zoning regulations and future development. So we've had the discussion a number of times. I think you can appreciate from the community point of view that it would look disjointed, disconnected. It would look like it was unplanned, and you literally would have a distinct break point coming down the road there. So somehow we need to be able to incorporate that in. I would think that it's something that can be done attractively, and it needs to be funded either through the East Avenue project, through the Walk Bridge mitigation project, since we're going to suffer through reduced quality of life on that for the next 5 years, but we need to consider it. I have a question on the standards too. When we took a look at some of the sidewalks there, it suggested that where you come in from the curbing and we have some of what may be decorative brick, is that still going to allow for an unobstructed sidewalk? And Steve, can you tell me now if the unobstructed in this zone would be 5 feet or 7 feet? I think we weren't clear the other night on that.
I don't have the standard open, but I thought it was 7.
It is 7 for the new one. 7.
So, right, and I see that you're just showing us examples, but I think the public would want to know everything that we're doing in East Norwalk would adhere
It's
to.
written as 7 in the design guidelines. So it is written out as 7.
And then back to what Mr. Pinto was talking about, thanks for bringing up the permeable and impervious and pervious. Some of the examples that come from around the country are areas where it doesn't snow. They don't have the severe weather that we have. So from a material point of view that you're looking at when you say permeable versus impervious, we would be considering materials that are suitable here. and low maintenance here, correct?
Yes, I'm using the materials that are already in the DPW's current guidelines. We're
Right.
just suggesting color and pattern changes.
Okay. Then the other thing is I think that we need to, when we're talking about what these standards are, we need to be able to highlight what Vanessa was just talking about so that the public is clear exactly where these standards are being applied, and to better articulate what the village district is and the understanding that there's a break point in what we're defining as the village design district and what the state and city are defining as the East Avenue widening lowering project. Just to be fair, we don't want people to be misled because East Avenue is the main gateway into the community. Oh, and I do have a question while I have these lights up here. Emily, the lighting that you're talking about, this is one of the standards in Norwalk. Can you tell me if this is the standard that's used in some of our public parks now? For example, Freeze Park or a Castor Beach Park? Or is this a different light you're talking about?
I do not know the answer to that. The standards that I looked at were the DPW standards, and this lumiere fits to the pole in the DPW standards, but it is a different lumiere from those that are used elsewhere in the city. I don't know if those poles are used in the parks too.
Okay. Vanessa, do you happen to know that? If the
I
DPW
I don't want to confirm it without seeing, because I can tell you that at least on the right of way, on the majority of our right of way, the pole and the foundation is exactly the same. What we're proposing here is just a different top. Now, I don't remember for sure what was on Vets Park. I don't know when was that installed. I can tell that this is exactly the same that we have on North Water Street. And then on Main, North and South Main.
Okay, and I'm probably
And
not
West
as
Avenue
familiar
also.
with those as I am in the public parks. So if there's some way to find out, and the reason why I ask is there's great public opinion. You either love them or hate them. But the lighting that Rex and Parks put into the parks, there's a lot of objection to in terms of the shape and the lighting that comes off. We've
But this
I've
will
done
be
it myself.
different
We've heard
because this is, we're changing here the top. So the only thing that is the same is the base. So it's the pole and the foundation.
and so the top would not be the one that Rex and Parks uses.
Correct. It is different, yes.
All right, so we're 30 minutes in with 9:60 to go. So if anybody else, I think, this kind of minor detail stuff too, if anybody has any comments or questions, we can do that by email as it relates to the design guidelines, unless anybody else has a burning issue that needs to get addressed.
Can I just do one more, Steve, please, on the bus shelters?
Sure.
Is there, if the bus shelters would be installed and maintained by the city of Norwalk, the Transit Authority, the Parking Authority, or a private developer? And can we address the objection of advertising as the funding on bus shelters?
Usually this particular one on East Avenue will be installed as part of the East Avenue Bridge replacement. And that's why we would like to ask DOT to consider giving us a green shelter. That's what we request. They ask us for a model, so then we can send that and see if they approve. Usually who maintain those is the Norwalk Transit.
Okay, and then are they,
They would own it. So I think that anything regarding to advertising, it will be more about having some kind of contact with them and see how that would work. The city will not gonna be involved.
the transit district you just said owns it, correct? The Transit Authority owns it? Okay. Thank you.
Okay, all right, I'm gonna pull up, might as well get right to the heart of the matter. I can find the email that I was looking for. I was gonna pull up Stephanie's email if I can find it. I pulled it up. All right, I'll navigate there, sorry about that. This just tells you I really need to empty out my inbox. Stephanie, I think you sent yours Monday morning or Tuesday morning, right?
Yeah, it was the 25th at 1:43 p.m.
There it
That's
is.
it.
All right. I know we had some email exchanges about this, so I figured it'd be good to just circle back to it. I think that it's a little bit tricky. I don't want to, there was some language that you had talked about that where it's, where developments would be encouraged to be less than the, developments, and I'm paraphrasing, so correct me if I'm misconstruing the intent, but developments that were less than the 3.5 stories would be looked more favorably on. I think that language is kind of problematic from a legal standpoint. I would not want to put that in the plan. I think that's kind of, if you have something where the standard is 3.5, I don't think it's good to say, we don't want you to do 3.5. You either don't do 3.5.
If I could paraphrase myself differently, what I suggested are we've had a lot of discussion in this group about listing out the types of things that the community would favor, like a grocery store, etc. So I think what I was proposing was that we include the type of language that says something like, based on community feedback, projects that minimize height and density, but encompass some of these other things are more likely to be embraced by the community. So basically beefing up that statement that we have talked about before.
Yeah, that makes more sense. And I think maybe you could also add something to that saying, use the word applicant, but they're encouraged to reach out to the neighborhood, the associations within East Norwalk, and we can list them if people would prefer, to reach out to them prior to submitting any applications to the city to gain feedback. I think that might, it's nothing through that is binding on them to do that, or nothing is binding in terms of what comes out of that conversation, but at least it'll give them a sense of, what people like and don't like, and also gives them a sense of what they're going to deal with, when they actually get to the application stage.
Yeah, that's all I was getting at.
Hey, Steve, can I make a comment on that?
Sure.
The, as you know from the research that ENNA did a year or so ago, a lot of which we shared with you in terms of public participation and public information, there are communities now that have codified having to have planning and zoning require a major development application reach out to community stakeholders. So as a part of their process, it literally is more than a suggestion of check the box, you might want to go do this. Depending on the scope, its size, location, and/or historic significance, it becomes a requirement. So
Yeah, I wouldn't go in that route. I don't know if we have any authority to do that. I wouldn't be comfortable with that, just based on the fact is right now you have a robust organization, but what happens if you don't have that robust organization and you put that as a requirement that they can't comply with?
And the reason why I bring that up is because the suggestion came through a number of the organizations that are still a part of the umbrella organization, the Coalition of Norwalk Neighborhood Associations. And so they endorsed it. There was a whole list of things that we sent in that all of the groups endorsed, and that was one of them. And I suggest we go back and look at that. And you're talking about significant areas like East Norwalk Neighborhood Association, West Norwalk, Cranberry, Silver Mine, etc. So it's not just one portion of the city. But in the meantime, we would suggest that you strongly suggest it, and in the hopes that they bring something to the table that's meaningful for people to understand, which is a process that didn't happen with 230 East Avenue, unfortunately.
Well, I disagree with that, but that's fine. I think, between Emily and I and Jessica, we can beef up the language at the beginning, kind of in the, maybe it's in the executive summary or the beginning of the document where we kind of point people in that direction to, to pay attention to what the study recommends and seek out input from the stakeholders in the area. That way, may increase your likelihood of success on your project.
Steve, if I can inject on that, interject, that seems to be a trend. I think many developers are pushing the envelope to pack people tighter and tighter together, and beginning to see this certainly in the South Water Street area where they're trying to change the Marine District to incorporate.
John, can you check your microphone?
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's kind of cutting out a lot.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Yeah, let's see. I don't know why.
It was really loud, and then it's.
Yeah, I'm not sure why that's the case now.
There you go.
Is it all right?
That's good.
No, yeah, no. As I said, I wanted to interject because that seems to be the trend that many developers are trying to push the envelope to pack more and more, dense, apartment buildings in an area that, people are trying to, in this day and age, maintain social distancing, as I pointed out. I don't know how attractive it is to keep packing people into an area that, especially in the East Norwalk area, that such as the Van Zandt Street building here. When I saw the number of apartment buildings in there and the renovations that's going in there, I'm not sure how that stands as far as the people of East Norwalk are concerned. I sort of agree with Diane in the process of sort of having a say in as far as the number of apartment buildings people can pack in a smaller area.
Well, I think that's kind of the crux of the matter. We've gone through. I understand your position after you stated it and read your emails. We've gone through Diane's position as representing the ENA board. I think the numbers we put forth, there's math behind it. There's opinion of the sub-consultants, RKG, behind why we came up with those numbers.
Again, I'm
the
concerned.
rationale is there's the reason why East Avenue is the way it is right now. And you think,
well, one piece of the equation, I'm sure, I don't know if it's been answered, is the carrying capacity that we have of our water treatment plant.
that's been addressed as part of the POCD. It's been addressed during the last two significant zone change applications. And Vanessa, if you want to jump in, but that's
we still have overflow into the harbor, in severe, certainly in storm weather conditions, and so I'm not sure how that carrying capacity would translate into more increased density.
Also, if I can jump in, I think it's also important to remember that you're using the zoning to set certain limits, but the market may not want to go up to those limits, right? So, as we're seeing, there is certainly a lot of changing thinking right now, and rightfully so, about what the impacts of COVID-19 are on how people want to live, how developers want to develop. I think there's still a lot of uncertainty of how that's going to impact not just the short-term market, which may be nil for all we know for a while, but also long-term trends. So you're setting up specific standards, but 5 years from now, the developers may not be interested in creating a product that is at the level that you set. They may want to be at a lower level. And so I think the key with
I'm not sure if that's in their financial interest to do that.
Well, and that's also true. And so, but we're
So why would they do that?
Well, let me just finish. So I think the key is to understand that you want to keep your zoning flexible enough to respond to changing conditions. So you are saying we don't want to go above a certain height. That's fine. That's absolutely appropriate. You've set that at 3.5 stories at the moment. I know there's some disagreement about that, but that's where it is now. That allows a developer to go up to 3.5 stories, which we are seeing based on current market demand is appropriate. That current market demand is that they're unlikely to want to redevelop at less than that. We don't know what the answer is going to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. So just keep in mind as you're putting as you're thinking about the changing zoning, as you're putting restrictions in place, that zoning tends to be in place for quite some time. And you don't want to put so many restrictions on that you are driving people out of the market and that nothing will ever happen. But conversely, you don't want to make it so relaxed that everything happens. And I think from the discussions I've been hearing from all of you, you're hitting that sweet spot now, in my opinion, is that the way we've tried to codify the desires of the community, you're hitting that balance of where you want to see the community go. Again, we're continuing to have conversations about that today, but I would be wary of making it too restrictive in terms of density because you don't know what's going to happen. I think you want to leave that flexibility. We're in a period of transition at the moment, and it's critical to understand that we don't know how long this period is going to last, and you don't want to react too quickly to it because you don't know what the long-term implications are.
Well, I'm just looking at it from the standpoint of taking a lesson from what's happening in New York City. I'm seeing a massive exodus. You know, people.
And we're also seeing a huge influx of New York population moving into Southwest Connecticut and other parts of Connecticut, including Norwalk right now. Whether that's a short-term
that's
reaction to what's
sure
going on at the moment, or that's a longer-term trend. It's way too early to try to project.
There are a lot of New Jersey and New York City cars and New York State cars in New Canaan this weekend. Quite a bit.
Yeah, there's people in. They may only be here for a few months, but they may be here for years. We don't know yet. I think that.
Well, according to the realtors, they're looking to buy.
It seems to me the crux of the issue is, to Steve's point, which I agree with, our current zoning has been in place for decades, and the investment we have, we see what that is. So in order to entice any new development, it stands to reason that something has to change. But as I outlined in my email, and as John just raised again here, obviously COVID-19 is going to change so many things. We have no idea how people will want to live. Developers have no idea because they don't know what's going to happen to workplaces, residences, etc. Nor will we know in any time that would allow us to finish this process. But what I raised in the email is, do we need to think about mitigating the risk? Is there some in between that helps protect our long-term goals if things don't change with development? For all we know, in 2 years, we'll be back to exactly where we were. And I know Brian wrote back about there are some 3-story buildings currently that seem fine in the area. But I don't think, other than Brian and John, anyone else wrote back. So I'd love to know really where people are in their thinking.
How about we start with, well, whoever hasn't chimed in yet would probably be the best way to start.
So I'll start. Oh, hello. Good afternoon. Yeah, so I've been sending the emails, all the information to our board, the ones that are on our board members. And because of the fact that we're just going only 1 story above of what's already originally permitted, and because of the fact that's also going to be within the 0.5-mile radius within the train station, they don't have any concerns as to, I mean, if they would have more concern if we go above 3.5 stories, that I can tell you, but not with 3.5 mass.
Brian or John, you want to jump in?
I said my piece in that note. We've got the heavily constricted and constrained, in my opinion, with 2.5, 3.5 stories. The design guidelines are excellent, which will give it shape and form. And really, if anybody wants to do anything, it's got to be somebody with money. So that's the developers. And they haven't moved very far so far in the short term we've been around. The It'll be interesting to see, as everybody says, what's going to happen over the future. We put enough in the design standards and zoning regulations of the plan to constrain, I believe, any excessive development by anybody's standards. We'll never get the whole theoretical capacity filled in a decade or 2 decades from what I can see. But anyway, so that's my piece, Steve.
John Cuddy's. I'm assuming he's still here. Maybe no. John gone? We miss him? Lose him?
He's still on,
John,
he's still listed as being attending, but his mic is muted.
He might be muted. It's trickier on your share screen because I can't see as much what's going on as I could before.
Well, he's listed here as being attendant, but I'm not sure if he's on mic.
Okay.
Are you guys
Sorry,
asking for me?
Yeah,
John.
he's
Oh,
unmuted
John,
now.
yeah, I think there he is. John Kites? I thought I heard him.
I'm sorry, guys. I'm in a bad area. You guys hear me?
Yeah.
All right.
Oh, I apologize. Yeah, no, I'm driving in a bad area on the mayor. Yeah, so just nothing to comment right now. I just want to thank everyone for their hard work and much appreciated. Thank you.
Oh, all right. Before you, just to clear, in case you didn't hear, we were just going through kind of person by person to see what their thoughts on the height and density proposal. I think that's kind of the crux of the discussion. So I don't know if you have any.
Yeah, there've been a lot of questions and a lot of back and forth, not just here, but social media and so forth. There's about the adding additional density and overall having apartments. And Steve, I know this is a little off topic, but I know we have quite a few multifamily homes, 2, 3, 4, 5 multifamily homes in the area in question. In my experience, I've always tried to think of it from both sides. Where okay, you've got an area with a significant amount of multifamily homes, and you're trying to introduce a plan, and then you have folks, of course, that are nervous about apartments, overcrowding, so forth, traffic, and those are all legitimate concerns. Steve, have we done any research on that behalf as far as looking? Okay, what do we where are we at as far as residents in the area? What do we, if someone were to come in and propose, say, or knocking down 5 multifamily homes in order to build an apartments of some kind? I mean, I guess I'm just trying to get a feel, because I've found in the past with my experience that, okay, if someone's going to come in with with the motivation or the desire to build apartments, but you'll be replacing, pretty much offsetting what's already there, where it would be a wash.
Are you asking in terms of East Norwalk specifically? I'm assuming.
Correct, right. The plan that we're introducing. It's something that I've been asked recently about apartments and so forth. And I just wanted to, and I know, like I said, it's a little off subject, but if someone had interest in developing apartments in the area, but yet replacing multifamily homes for this newer development, I mean, and from your experience, I guess, let's say, I mean, do you find that the numbers that come in are what you had previously, is what I'm asking?
Well, if in this scenario, over the 2 zoning changes we're contemplating, the density is going to increase. So if the opportunity is there, someone's going to, that more than likely they could remove existing structures to put up new ones to add density. I mean, if you think about East Avenue, a lot of those structures, they couldn't really support anything right now in terms of units, conversion wise. So there would be probably consolidation of lots. And one thing I was thinking about, and if I don't answer your question, please, I'll circle back and I'll definitely do a better job. But one thing I was thinking about is the thing on with East Avenue, it's got a lot of small properties. So for somebody to do something, they're going to have to probably consolidate some pieces to put them together. And being constrained by parking and the other amenity requirements, it's going to cause them to get creative how they design the building, how they integrate their parking. I think it's going to end up leading to a better designed product at the end, because they're not going to be able to do something cookie cutter based on the constraints that are being put on. So I think we're trying to, as Emily indicated, strike that balance between not over densifying the area, but also getting the things that we want to see as the end product. I don't know if that was a very convoluted way of answering your question.
No, not at all. That was very informative. You know, I'm just taking it into perspective. We're talking about, in the grand scheme of things, a small area, and I mean, anyone familiar with the area knows we have a lot of multifamily homes. We've got a lot of, you know, I mean, and we're not talking about 1, 2. We're talking about 3, 4, and 5 multifamily homes. So I mean, I mean, maybe this may not be the venue or the time to talk about it. I just had that question. But as far as the height restrictions, I mean, I feel like we've taken into consideration of many opinions, and I feel I have no issues with what's being proposed right now. Long story short.
And I know Diane has not chimed in on this. I think that's everybody else, though. Miss Vanessa wanted to, but I'm not sure if she does it.
I'm happy to go last.
No, I'm fine. I think that I think that I don't have, it's not my opinion. I'm just believe that after all this month, we are reflecting in this plan what the community, at least during those public hearings, were addressing. I would say that I was more echoing what Judy said. I think that if we were over the 3.5 could be an issue, but I'm comfortable on where we are now.
And before Diane, I jump in, one thing I forgot to mention. I did a lot of reaching out to folks in the real estate world today that do develop in Norwalk, also in Stanford, and then also the surrounding towns. And to pick up, there's a lot of New York interest right now in the area. And like I said, I think, and it might be short term because there's a lot of people looking for rentals through the summer and they want to get out of the city. And, you know, who knows, because their kids can distance learn in Norwalk the same as they can distance learn in, you know, Manhattan, for that matter. So we don't quite know what that's going to be. I think this kind of picks up on something Stephanie had mentioned, is the timing of this in terms of by the time the actual plan gets adopted and the zoning regulations adopted, you know, we're probably, you know, at the end of the summer anyway. We're in that time frame. Maybe it's September. So somebody still has to, no one can really submit an application until they have some assurance they know what the standards are. So I'd be surprised if somebody had an application ready to go right away, because they, you know, you don't know what happens at the final vote of the zoning commission on the density or the height or whatever. So they have to design their product to the actual regulations in place. So you know, we're probably looking, you know, say it is the Wells Fargo property that they come forward with an application. It's got to be at the earliest the end of the calendar year. I mean, I would think no longer than that. No, I should say no earlier than that. So by that stage or the fall, we should have a much better understanding of where we are in the economy, what the impacts of this slowdown are going to be, where we stand in terms of people's comfort level, venturing out into public, into crowds again, where they're going to want to live. It's going to be a more dense environment or not. And I think the developers, especially the smart ones, are going to understand that they can't put a product out that there's no market for it. So I don't think the fear of having all these apartments pop up that are not going to be occupied is, to me, that's not a big concern. I think that the markets, you know, the smart developers understand that. Okay, that's all. I'll shut up.
Well, I'll use the example of 230 East Avenue again, which was one that prior to the actual TOD study going out to bid, that project came in and had special zone regulations that were applied to it being part of a TOD district. And it, I think it flew by relatively quickly to get it approved. And it was, the majority of East Norwalkers did not want that project. So when we talk about the, okay, I know, Steve, you can shake your head, but
Having the
people
same
who,
conversation, meeting after meeting after meeting, it's just,
so comments suggested that were put in, public comment, etc. And the reason why it went through is because the city was reacting to a developer whose primary goal was to meet an arbitrary timeline that was set as a contingency to make the purchase, and that the way that you would write the zoning regulations had to be such that they could make the maximum profit level that they sought. And so that's exactly what happened there. I just want people to know that as we take a look at individual applications going forward, there's nothing to prevent that from happening again. I do want to
have to
address
jump
what
in
John.
1 second. I apologize. I got to cut you off on one thing because you're missing one very key point in why that application went through the way it did. The reason is because the zoning regulations weren't in place to prevent what the city did not want. We were reacting to something because we were sitting by and not doing any planning for years. The idea of what we're doing today is actually planning so we can dictate what we want and not have to respond to something that we don't want.
I agree with that. And I'm not sure applications came through that the residents would have vetted that may have been objectionable. And I'll spare you the saga again of some residents saying they would have preferred the rock crushing plant to the project that went in there. I do want to address something that Brian and John just spoke about, though. Brian Maxendale, I didn't get it verbatim, Brian, but you did speak about the fact that we have to work towards the potential of seeing this through to the maximum possibility, the build out. I'm not quite sure what term you used.
No, just the opposite. I said, although we have a theoretical maximum, it's very unlikely, I'd have thought, in anybody's scenario that we're ever going to get to that position. But anyway,
Right.
That's my view.
Oh, okay. Okay, right. I understand that, but there was something you said about the scope of the area. But anyway, so I'll take that back. My point is that the overall, if we were talking about one commercial venture, or we were talking about one parcel in particular, and you're looking at 3.5 stories, and you're looking at a maximum density of 1 per 800, every 800 square foot of parcel, that would be one thing. But I have to remind the committee continuously that the community doesn't really have a choice but to look at this as the potential for the whole area being developed at the maximum rate. And so you may have heard that we did some surveying last night with the community, the East Norwalk residents. The results are very preliminary. At the close of an 1.5-hour meeting, we had 44 responses. And as of right before I signed on, I think we're up to 170 something now coming in from the community. And overwhelmingly, people are concerned with both the height and the density. The majority of people, as the read that I had on the first draft, the first round of 50 survey results came in with greater than 58% of the people saying they would tolerate only up to 100 apartment units under the plan that we have here. And this is where we keep talking about a disconnect of what people on the committee and the consultant think they're hearing from the community that they want, and the reality of what people think they're going to get in order for what they articulated to you what they wanted. It's true, Emily, that you did relate back what you heard from the community in terms of the desired amenities and some of the, and Vanessa, some of the infrastructure as well. But then when people take a look at the actual recommended plan, there's complete pushback now to say, if this is what it is, then we wouldn't want to have a trade-off. And I can tell you that in the list of amenities that qualify for the height and the density, we listed all of them out, and we asked all the participants to choose as many as they wanted. And the question was, do you desire this in the East Norwalk community? And there were some things that were more desired than others. But the majority of people, again, so far, we'll do the final tally. we left them with 3 options at the bottom. One that said, in order to qualify for the density and height, you must contain, your development must contain all of the above. And so nobody really chose that because it would mean that we would have all these developments that have public art and a water fountain and a green wall, and it'd be cookie cutter all the way down the line. And then a more reasonable approach was that people thought that it could be acceptable if there was, quote, a specific mix of the above would be desirable. So in some combination, they thought that it could be worthwhile. The majority of the people so far chose an option that said none of the above would be able to qualify for the zoning bonus as it's written now. The compromise is something that I brought up the other day, and it's been taken off the table, and I think it needs to go back on the table. If it doesn't, we at least want it on the record that we tried to put it back on the table. If the height and density are creating a scenario of 12 to 1,500 or more apartments, and that amount of density is too great for the community to accept, then we have 2 choices. We can either reduce that down to, say, 3 stories and a density of 1 per every 1,025 square feet, which I think was level 2, or you have the option to reduce the actual geographical size of the plan area. The reason I bring that up, Steve, is really important. We had a discussion in the meeting last night that talked about the fundamental tenets of TOD and how it's really based around literally physically the train station itself. And so people felt that if you had that type of density at the train station, similar to what we allowed Spinnaker to do there, and it was restricted to that block, and then there was nothing beyond that, that they would be more agreeable to that type of, some people rejected it out of hand, entirely, but most people were more reasonable in terms of accepting the density if the scopes were literally at the train station. So I just want to point that out there. We continue to have a complete disconnect with the density and the height and what the potential is, whether we think that it's going to happen ever, whether we think it's going to happen over 20 years. The other question comes up about the potential for tax revenue, how the tax revenue is generated and spent. Does it cover the cost of schools, police, fire? We know that all the studies come back saying there's no significant impact on traffic, there's no significant impact on the schools. Presumably our water treatment sewer plant can handle infinite amounts of people, even though we know it can't. And so this is where the concern is.
Okay.
When
Well, I
we
think that
compile all of these, I just want to say we're leaving the survey open for the weekend. So when we get all the results back in, we'll share them with you. So that you'll see the survey itself and you'll see the responses. It was just a quick hit survey, and the more comprehensive one will be issued next week.
Okay, I think.
I did add one more thing which may help as well, Steve, as we said. I think we should have a dashboard and we should review at a certain time what has been happening, what hasn't been happening, with the opportunity to revise. Whether we do that in 2 years' time or 3 years' time, but we should have this review process in place.
That's one of the safety nets, Brian, by the way, that people did feel a certain level of comfort with, because the more that we presented this to people and had some of the numbers out there, the more discomfort there was. So in the interest of being fair, I did try to target as many of the safeguards, including the fact that there would be design guidelines. And that there would be peer reviews in some cases, but also that you couldn't have a development that comes in on those zoning bonuses that wouldn't require a hearing and then a complete review of the traffic analysis. So each incremental development would have to stand on its own to say, how is this impacting the community? I don't think, honestly, Brian, that people felt, even with that process in place, that there would be a shut-off mechanism, if you know what I mean. That there would be a point where the zoning commission or other bodies would then say, no more, we can't do that. And that was interesting.
You have a lot less faith than I do, but you may have a lot more experience, Diane.
Mhm. Right. True that. Hey, John Kites, if you're still there, you brought up an interesting point about multifamily in East Norwalk, because it is a big component of a lot of our areas here. And I think the way that I've understood it from people that we deal with that are either developers or work for developers is that if you had like a 4 or 5 or 6 unit multifamily and you wanted to have something that was better income producing, and also something that would attract long-term tenants. If we're looking at guidelines here, I think you look at it one of 2 ways. You might have some property owners or new property people that come in and buy it, and they simply renovate and improve what's already there. And that becomes a more attractive and a more profitable venture for them. In other cases, they take what's there and they would take advantage of the new density in order to increase the revenue. And I think Steve can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's been 3 of those in East Norwalk, like in the past 5 years. Maybe Fort Point, Gregory, and I don't know, we can't really count it. We can actually count in the development next to Dunkin' Donuts. Because they had incremental units, I think, in the houses, right, Steve?
I'm sorry, I was
The
writing something
development
down.
next to Dunkin' Donuts, I think the existing 2 houses that front that, they had additional units within those in addition to the 12 units in the back.
Yeah, I think so. I don't remember that specifically, but I don't think they were a large number
Right.
of units in anything that was there.
And
Smaller,
didn't we, Steve?
3 or 4.
Didn't we, Steve, in the plan, the overall plan indicated we wanted the northwest quadrant to remain very much as per the residential status it had. And if you get more and more closer, of course, to the river, by that I mean the Norwalk River, it gets more and more multifamily. Now that's a particular quadrant, that's about a quarter of the area, let alone the East Avenue, which had another sort of 30% of the area there, and then you've got the other pieces around in the side roads, which we weren't going to be developing. We were going to try and improve the basically pedestrian wayfare, the feel of the roads, etc. But maybe I'm wrong.
All right, so I think we've heard from everybody on this point. I mean, might be other stuff to go through, but I understand there's, John and Diane have both expressed, John Pinto, I should say, and Diane have expressed opposition or concern about the height and the density. I didn't hear that from the others specifically, but chime in if I'm not representing what your opinion is. I think in terms of, I'd be curious to look at the survey. I'd put much more value in anything if I had the chance to get out in front of a public audience and explain what we're doing and why we're doing it first, as opposed to them reacting to a question posed in a certain manner, which may elicit a response other than what they may have gotten from why we're doing this. So I think that's important. So I think if we get to this stage and Emily can, we talked a little bit roughly about dates. So if her and the team start working on edits to the document, we're hoping for like a roughly, jump in, Emily, correct me, roughly 2-week turnaround or so to get edits out. I'd take a quick peek to make sure to capture the overall essence, and then we would forward that to you folks as well as get it out to the public so they could have a few weeks to take a look at it, and then we would set a Zoom meeting date to go through that, where Emily and I would present the plan. Here's what we're proposing and why, and then turn it over to the public to get feedback that way before it gets referred out to, or maybe simultaneous to referred out to the Planning Commission to start their review.
I think the timing is broadly right from us. We're anticipating the 2-week turnaround. I know there were some comments on the graphics, and that might be the only thing that holds it up. We think that the fuzziness was due to us sending a low resolution, so it'd be easy to email, but we're going to take another look. So if we have to rebuild some of those to make sure it's clear, that might take a little longer. But I think we're aiming for 2 weeks to get everything turned around, all the comments, and certainly the comments that we've had from you from the last few meetings and the emails have been extremely helpful. Steve has forwarded all of the comments to us John, I know you had some on some harbor management issues. We're looking for the appropriate place in the plan to add those. The other comments that you sent, again, have all been really helpful. So we're working with Steve to get what we need to incorporate it and turn it around and get back to you and to the public for their comments.
Steve, can I just interject? I want to ask just a quick question, a point of reference and information on a point that Diane and John Kites had brought up. When they do, and this is an issue that we had when the Harbor Commission reviewed a couple of the, matter of fact, the application on Van Zandt Street. When they talk about traffic patterns, how do they normalize those traffic patterns? From what I saw from the review for traffic density, they normalize it during a 24-hour day period. Now, or do they normalize it during the actual rush hours? You know,
They usually look at both. They look at the peaks, which are usually, there's an AM window and a PM window, and that varies by the location and what the use is, but it's usually 7 to 9 roughly in the morning, and then, I don't know, 4:30 to 6:30 roughly.
The reason I bring that up because the application that I reviewed for that structure normalized their traffic pattern on a 24-hour basis, and I thought that was kind of skewed.
Very, very.
You know. So, anyway, that's just the point of information for myself.
That's a great question, John, because they also looked at some hours there that are standard to the guidelines they use nationally, but they hadn't considered it completely for the uses that were being recommended for that building.
That's
For example,
correct.
if you take a look at, there was a significant use for daycare, and so you would skew that commute time even earlier than it would have been. And we did raise those questions at the time when the zoning commission even was questioning some of how the analysis was done based on the uses that were in the building.
That's correct. Yes. All right. No, thank you, Diane.
Sure. So we got about, I'll leave a 2-minute cushion. We have about 15 minutes left before we get booted out by the powers that be. What else? Is there any specific, because I know that the one outstanding item, well, the other item that was like more of a discussion point with the zoning regulation portion itself was the amenities. And like I said a couple of times, if there are specific items within the amenities that need to get tweaked, that's an appendix to the document. So that can be kind of a little bit of a moving target, so to speak. So we can adjust that as we go forward, even if we publish the draft with the current configuration of the amenities and how it's calculated. That can get changed half a dozen times before anything's finalized. So, and I myself, I don't want to get caught up on the numbers tonight. I'd love to spend a whole day just trying to mathematically figure out how this all works, or have somebody smarter than me do that. But I didn't know if anybody else had any other crucial points on that that they wanted to dig into.
Actually, Steve, if I can just sort of jump in. So, you know, in listening to all of you at our previous conversations, I did adjust the point system, tweaked it a little bit so that it was harder to get to certain thresholds, and that especially in the public amenities, some were weighted more than others. But I think Steve made an important point, which is this is an appendix. It does have to go through a separate approval process, and I would completely anticipate that during that approval process, there are further changes to that. So I think the key at this point is to make sure that it's in a format that is ready for public comment, but understanding that not only will it go through public comment as part of an appendix to this plan, it will continue to go through that public comment during its own approval process. So this is really to give the broad outlines of what we think this should look like.
Yeah, and if the public comes up with other amenities that we haven't thought of that would work, and you know, I know we can't do things like a grocery store because that's just not not something we could require. But if they have some other use or function that would be implementable, similar to what we're talking about, I think that can get added in as well.
I also have reached the limits of the Google verse, and I'm still waiting for inspiration to strike, but I'll take a look. I didn't have a chance to work out the math in the revision, but if I have any comments, I'll send them separately.
And I'll review that too. I hadn't realized that it's in the copy that we have now. And just to what you were saying too, Emily, it's absolutely no fault of, you know, Harriman or this committee or the city or anyone that we have two conditions going on now that are make it difficult as this thing advances from the public point of view. One is the pandemic, obviously. This plan has such magnitude and implications for our community that it's really hard for people to understand when I tell them that this could be to legal public hearings, possibly at the end of June or beginning of July. And that's likely to be via Zoom or some very limited, personal contact and presentation. So that's hard. The other thing that happens, again, no fault to the committee as this timeline moved along, is we're likely to be into some of the decision-making part of the legislative bodies it goes through in July and August then. And those are really kind of killer times for, you know, in terms of trying to engage the public. And I think we need to keep that in mind with what materials we're putting out, how quickly we get the materials out, the vehicles that we're using for people to get comments back in, and and make sure that those materials and the communications are kept up to date. Even as of today, the tomorrow.norwalk CT site that we refer people to has not been updated. The verbiage on the site would indicate to people that that the project hasn't even really begun in the tense that they use. And there's really nothing that the public sees there that from anything after January of this year. And that's been the vehicle that we've been told to use for the public.
Have we set the number of public opportunities for comment that people will have once we have the revisions done? Like, are we planning 1 meeting, 2 meetings?
So what Emily and I kicked around was we would do the public, we would present the plan at the end of June. And then, so, you know, maybe it's a 30, hopefully around 30-minute presentation or so. And then the rest of it would just be comment. We could decide whether we're going to give people a certain amount of time to talk or not. We can work that out, you know, as we move forward.
The only thing I'd like to make a plug for, if we have the opportunity for 2 periods at different times of day, I know I've been doing a lot of virtual events, and I have found, I thought the evenings would be better, but it has not worked out that way. I get more participation in the morning, actually. So, you know, just to make it as easy as possible for as many people to chime in as we can allow would be great.
I don't have a problem doing that. I'm at Emily's mercy of her time. So if she's, or I'll go solo, one of the two.
I think the other thing that we've been doing, Stephanie, is recording. So obviously we can record meetings. I
was about to say, even if you record one and then the second time you can play that and.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's been working out for us in a number of different venues. So recording a meeting and replaying it, or one of the things we're doing now is we had a committee meeting. We're recording the presentation separately and setting up an email so that people can respond with questions to the pre-recorded video as well. So I think there's a number of opportunities. I'll also say that some things that some of my colleagues and clients are finding is that during this period, there's always the digital divide, and we have to keep that in mind, but they are finding a surprising number of people engaging that they wouldn't have had otherwise, simply because they can do it from home. So rather than going to a meeting at 7 o'clock and having to figure out childcare and who's staying home and who gets to go to the meeting, they're able to log on, listen, and comment. And again, the digital divide is a problem, but for those people who do have access, there's some of my clients are seeing more participation in some of the meetings that they're having than they had in the past. So
absolutely.
Are we going to accommodate the Spanish-speaking community as we move through the process now, and how do you envision doing that?
That's a
Steve,
good-
we'd have to have a chat about that and figure out.
I don't know, that hasn't come up as far as Zoom goes, so I have to ask.
I wonder if there's a way, if you record the presentation, you could have it captioned.
Wouldn't even need to do that. One of my colleagues is a native speaker of Spanish, so I could have him do some of the pre-recording.
Steve, are you planning on stakeholder group presentations? There'll be multiple public presentations, like one to ENNA and one to ENBA and maybe other.
I'm happy to do that. I might not ask Emily to give up any more of her time to do that,
Right.
but I would do that. And Stephanie, just to answer the rest of the other part of the question, the planning commission by statute and by the charter has to have 2 public hearings on so technically we have to amend the POCD to include this document as part of that plan. So the planning commission has to hold 2 public hearings. They also have to forward the matter for a referral to the planning committee of common council, who will more than likely hold a public hearing as well. So there's going to be subsequent bites at the apple too.
So planning commission has a hearing and zoning commission has a hearing?
No, planning commission has 2 hearings.
2 hearings.
Zoning will have hearings on the regulations, it's in the design guidelines themselves. But that's
And when would
But
that be?
That's after it's approved by planning, right? And the council?
Yeah.
So they're already within the document and they become the basis for the plan itself, but there's no public hearing on it until after the plan has had a public hearing.
No,
Just to be clear.
No, the zoning regulations and the design guidelines are appendices to the plan, so they're subject to comment as part of the hearing.
Yeah, and Steve, can I interject as well? I mean, Harbor Commission also has their review process.
Yeah, so there'll be, the POCD itself will be a very small amendment. There's not going to be much text. It might be 1 sentences or 2 sentences. It's really it's referencing the East Norwalk TOD plan as the plan for that area. So as Emily indicated earlier, we're happy to add the language you forwarded to include in the plan.
And what about a coastal site plan? Do you need that from any coastal site plan development
No.
document?
No, because I don't think so at all. I'm not sure actually, no, if you want to clarify, but I don't think so.
Well, I mean, various areas, yes, various areas within the areas that you have covered are within the coastal management area.
Right.
Yeah, I don't.
There should be some indication of where that coastal area management, is contained within the overall district map. Because those are all for any site plan development, that's certainly a requirement.
Yeah, I think that's already in the POCD, but I mean, if we want to include that.
I thought, it's in the POCD, but if you're looking at the East Norwalk, TOD as a quasi separate document, I think that should also be sort of be referenced.
Yeah, I'm sure we can add that to 1 or 2 figures and reference it. That shouldn't be.
Right.
We'll check, do we have Steve, we can talk about whether or not we have a GIS layer for that.
Yeah, Brian can get it to you if you don't have it already.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Brian.
Steve, when will we have documents that we can get to the public so that we can continue the public work that we're doing?
I'm hoping, it's really up, punt it to Emily, but we're hoping for around a 2-week turnaround. So if in a perfect world, I got things back to me 2 weeks from tomorrow, then I would look at stuff over the weekend to make sure we hit all the major points, get any comments back to Emily that Monday. Hopefully they would be nothing for me to do. And then as soon as that got the final okay, then I would forward that out to you and we would get it up on the website for comment and start publicizing.
Okay, and that only really leaves us then with a couple weeks time before you start to actually advance it through to public hearings, etc. So it's short. I think what we'd like to do, Steve, for ENNA is go ahead now and publish what we have. And as I said last week, we'll do that with caveats and disclaimers written all over it. That it is a draft, it's a working document that the Oversight Committee's been working on, and that it's a document I work on as their representative. but I really feel at this point that we have to get it out to the people we're talking to. We're literally referring to stuff that they can't see or hold in their hand, and we're trying to describe things. So people are smart. They'll understand it's a draft. It's a work in progress, that there's been a number of comments that are being incorporated into it as we speak, and it'll continue to evolve.
And I think my only concern with that is if people comment on something that's being changed in relation to your comments. And I think what I understood from Steve, and Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, is that, so we turn it around in 2 weeks, then he gets it out to you and members of the public. So that would be roughly mid-June. And then 2 weeks from then, we have the first public presentation, not the beginning, not the public hearings for the approval process.
Right.
So it's
Yeah,
more than
that
2
would be in
weeks.
July.
Yeah, exactly. So
Okay.
they'll have
Yeah.
more than 2 weeks
Yeah.
to be able to read
Well,
and
see,
comment on it
yeah,
before it goes into the public
I
hearing process.
appreciate that, Emily, and that's still not a whole heck of a lot of time for people, working full-time, homeschooling and doing the whole bit. So and we will clarify, because the comments come back into us even at our meeting last night. As people were alluding to things that have subsequently changed, I pointed that out in every instance. So
Okay.
if there's something that they saw in January, don't forget they haven't been engaged with the city since January. If there's something that they haven't seen since then, and it's been corrected, changed, modified, whatever, we pointed it out.
My strong preference would be that you don't release anything, because just to Emily's point, I think that clouds the discussion and then ends up wasting time. If somebody has a point that they don't like that we've subsequently removed, then they've already established a certain mindset and they've already framed their opinion of things based on information that's no longer relevant.
Well, much in the same way that they have the one that's posted on tomorrow, .norwalkcp.org. If that's their only reference, they're dealing with something that's literally from November or December. So I respect what you're saying, Steve, but I think that we really need to work with the community in the way that they need to, so that they can understand this.
I will just say that I don't believe I've ever had a single committee member release a draft of a document that was still being discussed by the committee. Normally it's once the final comments are made from the committee members, and then it goes out to the public for their comment and review. This is a very unusual thing for me to see, that one committee member would release it. So I just put that out there to you and to the other committee members, that this is not a process I normally see.
With the 2 minutes remaining, what does everybody else think of?
Steve, can I have just one other interjection here? Did you share with Emily the Harbor Commission's coastal vision? Did you get that document, Emily? The commission prepared a document in February 2019. It's a coastal vision. It's for conservation, economic development, and beneficial land use in Norwalk coastal management area.
I am not sure. I can go and check our files, but John, if you wanted to send that to Steve to send to me, that would be great.
All right, I think, Steve, you may have a copy of that, because we were trying to encourage incorporation or perhaps attachment of that document on the Norwalk website, or also perhaps associated with the POCD in general. I think we had that discussion.
No, not specifically, because to be quite honest, that the bulk of the changes that we're talking about are not in proximity to the harbor. They're not abutting the harbor, so it hasn't been a big focus of
I'm
our
talking about a coastal management area. This is a coastal management zone, and we are well in it.
Yeah, as I said, I don't think there's big impacts that are going to happen harbor-wise or coastal management-wise as what we're proposing versus what's going on in that whole area now. If anything, we're going to do things that reduce impervious surface, improve drainage, and things that should, be more in line with
it goes
the
beyond
plan
that.
than what's currently allowed.
It goes beyond that, Steve. I mean, if she would like to take a look at this document and see if anything can be incorporated within that, TOD. If you have the time to look at it, review it,
I'm happy to look at the document.
right? Because I think you'll find it very helpful, I'm sure.
And the top end of Mill Pond does come obviously into the Wells Fargo site and into our area, I think, Steve.
And that's been a major problem in the past with mercury sedimentation.
Yeah, so that, I mean, anything I think that happens on that site will be a vast improvement of what's there now.
But it's also contained in the area, certainly, you know, close to, especially if you're talking about also the I-95 bridge. You know, we have some certainly development going on in that area as well, and we have drainage coming down from into that particular area, which we've had our major issues with regard to dredging of our harbor in that particular area right there. But in any event, I'll send that. I can send that document to you, and you can certainly peruse that and see if that certainly helps you out in figuring out what our harbor town is all about.
Great, thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Closing comments before we have to get kicked out for the night?
No, we don't have any set date yet, right, for anything next?
No, because
There should be, okay, thanks.
I think Emily will, if she gives me an update in a week or so, I'll tell you where we're at, if we're keeping to our timeline or not.
Thank you.
Okay,
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
No,
you.
thank you
Thank
very
you.
much, guys.